That's good. Okay, I guess.
Let's get started. See, Barbara's over there. Just give her. Okay, I call this meeting of the UCF Presidential Search Committee to order. Meetings covered by the Sunshine Law, and the public and press are invited to attend. Karen, please call the roll and confirm a quorum.
Chair Beverly C.
Here.
Vice Chair Alex Martins.
Here.
Governor Tim Serio.
Here.
Mr. John Giuliano.
Here.
Dr. Andre Garcia. Dr. Michael Georgopoulos.
Here.
Mr. Timothy Hill.
Here.
Dr. Barbara Jenkins.
Here.
Dr. Victoria Lorzell.
Here.
Ms. Madeline Mills.
Here.
Dr. Cynthia Muniz.
Here.
Mr. David Odahowski.
Here.
Dr. Kathleen Plinsky.
Here.
Trustee William Self.
Here.
Dr. Stella Sung.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Karen. The minutes from the November 5th, 2019 meeting were previously shared with you electronically. They're included in your materials for today. If there are no suggested corrections, then the minutes stand approved. I'm pleased to welcome back Alberto Pimentel. Do I have that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. From Storbeck Pimentel and Associates. Mr. Pimentel is visiting our campuses today and tomorrow to conduct various listening sessions and open forums. He will return on December 9th for listening sessions focused on alumni and the Central Florida community. With his support, we will also conduct listening sessions and open forums in January. Before I turn it over to Alberto, who will moderate our discussion, I want to thank you again for all your involvement, and our search will be stronger because of all of your contributions. And now I'd like to ask Alberto to address the committee. The floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So during our time together, what I'd like to do is explore how these search processes how they usually work, and then, frankly, what's going to work here, which may not at all look like what other search processes, the process that is usually followed. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited about the prospect of representing the university. I think you have a lot of positive attributes that need to make it out into the world so that folks know about it. I'm not so worried about negative press or concerns that people are going to share with me throughout the next couple of days. I'm more concerned about changing the narrative. And I want to get the narrative out there in a more positive way and use the search process as a way of doing that. In this process, if all we do is end up with the right candidate, then we have failed. What we need to do is be able to use the process as a way of defining the narrative that needs to be told from this point forward. We need to use the process to develop the opportunity for whoever steps in to have a wonderful honeymoon period. The opportunity for them to make a difference and set a new course. So I'm hoping that as we work together in this process, that we keep in mind that while the end goal may be to identify the right candidate, we also have a responsibility to make sure that that candidate is successful. And to do that means that we need to look at what the narrative is going forward and start telling your story in a more compelling way, in a way that is going to excite others, not only because you need a strong president, but because that president is going to need a strong team. And so we need to start telling the real story of this university. And so I'm hoping that as we work together on this process, we can find ways in which to figure out how we inject that into the process. So when I talk about reviewing what a search process looks like, know that it needs to be customized for this particular search. In this case, we have to figure out how we start getting your story out in a more compelling way. There's a good story to tell. It's a heck of a story. We just need to figure out, where do we build it in? How do we tell it in a way that's not only compelling enough to get the candidates to come in, but frankly, for those that aren't interested, for them to know, wow, there's something going on there that I should be aware of, something I should be connected to. Okay? So as we do that, know that I am often going to suggest that we do things that might look a bit unorthodox. But if you keep in mind that the goal is beyond just getting the right president, then you'll find that all the pieces of the puzzle that I'm going to be suggesting we add to this process, that they're not unorthodox. It's all about making sure that we set the person up for success. Okay? So as we work together, please know that I tend to be very direct. So if there's any issues, I tend to tell you right up front, so that way we can work them out together. Likewise, I would hope that you would be comfortable enough to be very direct with me. I take direction quite well, and frankly, I do my best work if I know exactly what it is that is going to make you happy. The process here is not meant to see whether or not we could get a level of equilibrium where everyone's just okay. I need you to be excited about the candidates. I need you to be thrilled about the type of candidates that we're recruiting. Candidates don't usually get better with age, so if you're not excited about them, you're not likely to all of a sudden get excited about them later down in the process. It tends to go downhill more so than you deciding, oh my gosh, there's something I just missed. This is a wonderful person that I'm so glad that we spent the extra time and energy to deal with them. We need to start off with a level of excitement and then build from there. Okay? So as we work with each other, please make sure that you feel comfortable to tell me what you like, what you don't like, so that way I could make sure that my team puts together the slate of candidates that is going to most excite you. Now, part of that process then means that we have to figure out what it is that we're really looking for. So that's the purpose of the listening sessions. I'm going to go talk about that later this morning, but the purpose of the listening sessions really is to help indoctrinate me, get me a sense of what's really going on, and for me to start figuring out how I tell the narrative. Now, it's important to get the feedback, it's important to get that input, because I need to get a sense of how people are seeing themselves, how they're seeing the role. Because at some point, candidates are going to ask me, so when you talk to Group X, what did they have to say? And I need to be able to share with them that story. But at the same time, it's good for us to remind individuals that not only are we buying, we're also selling. When we get into these search processes, people tend to forget that half of it. They tend to forget that part of what we're doing is wooing candidates. That's an important part of the process. We can't forget that that's part of our job. So we have to also be able to tell them the issues, but also tell them the upside. So again, as we go through this, I would like to just remind you that I'm going to continue to remind you throughout the process of the importance of that. So let's talk a little bit about what a general process looks like. And then I want to tell you where I think we need to make modifications. Then I'd like to get your input in terms of where you think we need to get modifications. Okay? Now, it's a generic process. So it's not meant to be a one-size-fits-all. The generic process is meant to have add-ons and for things to come off and to be configured. It needs to be customized for the community that we're representing, for the university we're representing. So anything I share with you, please know that any part of it could be moved, changed, altered in any way you wish, okay? So the search process usually consists of 4 pieces. The first part is the fact-finding. So the fact-finding starts today. This is where I go out, members of the committee come with me and join me wherever possible to these different sessions, and our job is to listen. We're going to focus on 4 key questions. The questions are not meant to limit the conversation, it's meant to get the conversation started. So it's not surprising that sometimes once we get the group started, it's not surprising that sometimes we don't get to complete all 4 questions. But the idea is that we use the questions as a catalyst for discussion. So let me tell you what they are. First question I usually like to ask is, from the perspective of the group and the members of the audience, what are the challenges and opportunities, both short and long term, that the new president will encounter? Short-term meaning, they're here already. Long-term meaning, sometime within the next 3 years. We don't like to focus beyond that because after that, things change anyway. But we want to get a sense of how are people perceiving the issues now, and how critical are those issues to the success of the university. The second question we ask is, based on those challenges and opportunities that you identified, what are the qualities and characteristics and background and experience that we need in this next candidate? A second part to that question, kind of a two-way, if you will, is what are the interpersonal skills that are necessary for that person to be successful here? It goes to the old adage that I guess I had one of my clients used to tell me every time we started a search together, the no jerk rule is in effect. The idea was, we're going to find individuals who are brilliant, but we also need individuals who have a high EQ. We need individuals that people want to work with and work alongside. And it's just as important as the other skills. Now, what that looks like does vary from environment to environment. So we want to spend some time figuring out, what does that look like here? It's a question of fit. What's a good fit for this institution? The third issue that we want to explore with the different groups is, are there any current large-scale projects or initiatives that are in place that the next president will need to see to fruition, but will not have the opportunity to influence? So sometimes there are processes, sometimes there are major implementations, sometimes there are large-scale construction projects, sometimes there are capital campaigns, or they're just initiatives that are already underway that that person just needs to see to completion, and shouldn't use that as an opportunity to stop those projects that are in process or change direction. Wouldn't be good. So we want to know whether or not there's anything such as that in place. And the last thing I want to know is, why should someone come here? What are the selling points? Part of it is for the candidate, but part of it is also to help the candidate sell the opportunity to their families. It's an important part of the job, right? Part of what I'm looking for when I ask that question is, can people answer the question? Sometimes I get audiences that are so stuck in the past or so stuck in their own personal grievances that they can't see beyond that. And so they don't see that one of the issues that they have to resolve is, how do you develop a more positive perception of the institution you currently reside at? And it's important for us to know, because should that surface, then we need a caucus and say, okay, folks, when candidates come in, how are we going to tell that other side of the story if the campus community can't tell it itself? Because someone's going to have to tell it, right? So know that as we have these conversations, the value of it is, yes, gathering the information that we're going to share, but the other value of it, it's a preview of what the candidates are eventually going to see. because I will be meeting with all the same groups that the candidates will. And it helps me understand from the candidate's perspective how they're going to be viewing each group. It also allows me, if appropriate and necessary, to inoculate the candidates in advance. Okay, that makes sense? Okay. Now, the end result of that first phase is a deliverable, and there's two deliverables at the end of this first phase. The first deliverable is a position profile, position prospectus. Now, a position prospectus varies in terms of how it looks, but think of it as a college view book, where what you're doing is using this opportunity to put all the positive aspects about the university in one place, kind of a brag sheet, if you will. So the first half of the document talks about the university, gives a description. Second part deals with somewhat of a brag sheet, points of pride and so forth. The third part then talks a bit about the duties and responsibilities affiliated with the role. The fourth piece then talks about the challenges and opportunities. And we get those challenges and opportunities from the discussions we just had. And then the last piece deals with what are the qualities and characteristics that you're really looking for. And this is a special section because often when you look at job ads, if you were to go to Chronicle today and ask every firm to submit their position profile, you'll notice that the qualities and characteristics aspects tends to be about as long as your arm, and there's nothing that really differentiates one from the other. What we're going to do here a little differently is rather than having 52 things on the list, and the last one's usually walking on water or something along that line, what we're going to do is we're going to trim it down. We're going to focus on those attributes that are most important. Most candidates, when they look at it, just blow past that last page because they figured it's just, it's the traditional. Good communication skills, strong leadership skills, a good manager, someone who understands shared governance, someone who's a good fundraiser, someone who understands community relations. Sound familiar, right? I mean, those things are true, got it. But every candidate already knows that. What they want to know is, what specifically do I need to have in order to be successful at your institution? And so we don't want a list of 52 things. We want to identify those key attributes that are going to be most important and are going to actually make a difference. I'm not saying that good communication skills shouldn't be on there. I'm saying let's be very specific about what you want. Okay. So the second document that we produce gets generated by the first document, and that's your advertisement. Okay. Now, when we produce the first document, I usually like to work with your marketing communications team because I want it to look good. I want it to represent who you are. So I like to usually put pictures of the institution. Look, I will tell you, you got a beautiful campus. I drove around yesterday, walked around yesterday. It's a heck of a campus. I've been doing searches for 25 years. I've known about this university for that long. I was here 20 years ago. It don't look anything like it did 20 years ago, right? And I'm going to challenge you that the people we're going to be recruiting will know the institution, but they haven't been here in a while either. So let's sell it. Let's put it up front. It is a calling card. It's a beautiful campus. You got great buildings. You got great space. It looks good. Don't hide it. So let's use the position profile as a marketing tool. Keep in mind, in this kind of a search, I'm going to be talking to anywhere between, on the low end, 400 and the high end, 700, 800 people. Now, when I say I, it'll be my team and I, right? Which means that every time we talk to somebody, we're going to be sending them the profile. That's a lot of touch points. It's an opportunity to redefine what a person's image might be of the institution. If they've never been here, we're putting a beautiful image in front of them. If they haven't been here, like I hadn't been here in a while, it redefines the perception of the institution. And while we might be saying that we're looking for a president today, you're also looking for faculty members, administrators, deans, you name it. And trust when I say that when an administrator has a positive impression of an institution, they are more than likely to recommend it to their colleagues, to their graduate students, to their colleagues. So think about this from the perspective of, we're going to tell your story, whether you like it or not. I become your ambassador. We're going to tell your story in a compelling way to get people excited about the university. And if they tell me no, they're not interested in the job, I'm okay with that as long as you walk away with a positive impression of the university. Because if that's all we accomplish, we win. So we're going to do a lot of that. So in this case, what we're going to do a little differently is we're going to make sure that we're going to expand the list of who we're going to be talking to, because I need to change the narrative. And the sole purpose of that is to get your story out. Okay? A little different. So it's not just about finding the candidate. Keep in mind, we're going to do that. But we have to cast the net a bit broader in order to tell your story a little differently. Okay? So once we get past stage one, now we go into stage two. Now, in stage one, I need your participation. Stage one, I need your participation because I need you to show up with me to some of these sessions that I'll be having. I need your participation because I need you to be critical in terms of the documents that we produce to make sure it feels like you. It doesn't feel like it's produced by a consultant. If it feels like it's produced by a consultant, we lose. It has to tell your story in your voice. Now, I may be shaping that a little bit, but it has to be your voice, or else we lose. So in the second phase, it's all about me, my team and me. And this is a recruitment phase. This is where we take what you've told us, create the narrative that we're going to be sharing with the different individuals that we're going to be talking to, and now we just start talking to those individuals. And what we're doing is we're recruiting them. We're asking individuals to either nominate people that they might know or to jump in themselves. Now, in the recruitment phase, there's two aspects of it. The first is what we call passive recruitment, and the second is active recruitment. Passive recruitment you've all seen. We get the ad that we just produced, we run it through the Chronicle of Higher Education, we place it in all the different periodicals, and then we wait to see who responds. Passive recruitment because we don't do much other than place the ads. You're not asking me to do passive recruitment. We do it, but that's not why you're asking me to do this. What we do is the active recruitment. Active recruitment is when we take what you told us you're looking for, we look at those individuals across the country who possess those skills and characteristics, who are not necessarily on the job market, who are minding their own business, doing good work someplace else, and we convince them that this is the better opportunity. We go from a no to maybe, from maybe to a yes. Now I'm going to ask you to suspend judgment. Again, this is another part where it's going to be a little different. Often what happens when I make the first phone call is individuals tell me no. They say, thank you very much, I am flattered, now go away. Now, please know that when they turn me down the first time, it's not because they're turning you down. Anyone who's been in a search process, and please know that any individual we're going to be going after has likely been in a search process at some point in their life. Being a candidate is the most uncomfortable, nastiest thing possible. Because you have to think about it from the candidate's perspective. When they're saying no to me the first time, they're saying no to the notion of being part of a process. Because they know when they say yes, what that means. It doesn't just mean, hey, I'm going to jump in. It means that every conversation at home from this point forward is going to be about the possibility of getting this job. It means that every waking hour, they're now scouring the internet, looking for every story related to the university, trying to engross themselves in what it means to be an administrator and a leader here. They're looking at all the issues that you might have. They're studying everything. So they're basically studying you, and that takes a lot of time, in addition to their full-time job. It also means that if they're married or have a partner, that they need to tell that individual that they might need to give up the job they love to relocate. If they own a house, you're going to be selling that too. If you have kids, well, and if they like their school, well, maybe not so much. Maybe they weren't so attached because you're going to have to pull them out of the school and have them relocate. If you have elderly parents who you're taking care of and they have a wonderful hospice and everything else is working really well, they now have to investigate a new set of opportunities for those elderly parents. And then there's the risk of exposure. No one's afraid about being exposed and being the winner. Trust when I say that. No one ever has a problem with that. It's being exposed and then not getting the job and knowing that everybody on your campus knows you didn't get the job. And if you've been up for one or two other opportunities, even worse. Because what's going through your mind as a candidate is, at what point does my campus start to wonder whether or not they married a loser? Right? This is my third search up. I haven't gotten the job. Is everyone on my campus now wondering, oh my God, what has everybody seen in this individual that we're not? Why does no one want this individual? Now, that's not really the way the searches work, but mentally, that's the way the candidate is playing out. So that fear of rejection is very real. So when I place that first phone call, that's what's going through their head. Not the University of Central Florida. No, we're not there yet. They're trying to get over these complications and issues that they know they're going to have to encounter. And because it's so distasteful to be put in that position and be put in that point of limbo, because keep in mind, when they're a candidate here, especially when they're a finalist, they're trying not to make decisions at their current institution that their successor is going to have to live with, especially if they're not going to be there, right? I mean, so it is just this tenuous situation. We're in this wonderful state of limbo where nothing makes any sense. So it's not a real positive position to be in. So when they say no to me the first time, I hear it. No to me that first time, all that means to me is not today. I didn't hear no. You don't know enough to tell me no. You're saying no to your concept of what it's going to be like. My job is to get you over that hurdle. My job is to get you from a no to maybe, and from maybe to a yes. It's a process. So, where I mentioned earlier I need you to suspend judgment is this. We're going to be talking about individuals that we're going after. And you might be a bit slighted when I say I've gone after a person and they've turned me down a couple of times. You see that as rejection? I see it as recruiting. I just haven't recruited them hard enough yet. I got to do it again. So I need you to refrain from making the judgment that says, well, my gosh, they've already turned us down once, they've turned us down twice, why are you going and begging? I'm recruiting. It's a process. So don't take it personal if they reject you the first couple of times. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. It's okay. You know, my dating experience in high school is a wonderful example of how that works. I'm not afraid of that, right? But I need you with me. So I need you to suspend judgment. In that recruitment phase, it also means that some members of this committee may have to help me with that. Because sometimes folks just need that gentle nudge from someone who's not the recruiter, right? They want to know, from someone who has the boots in the ground, what does that really look like? Now, whatever I'm saying needs to be consistent with whatever you're saying. If there's an inconsistency, we're done. And so we're always going to tell the truth. We're always going to present the facts appropriately. But telling the truth doesn't mean saying all the negative stuff. It means that if you're going to say the negative, balance it out with the positive. Because the truth is both. Right? So what I want to do is make sure that as we're recruiting these candidates, that we're telling them the truth of what they're going to be stepping into, what the opportunity is, and then let's talk about the challenges. But let's do it in a way that individuals get excited about both. So in this recruitment phase, another thing that might look a little odd is I'm going to ask some of you to join me in the process of recruiting the candidates. Please know that it'll be scripted. It's always well choreographed, right? It kind of goes like this. I call a candidate tells me no, and I say, I understand. But the chair of the committee is a taskmaster. It's not going to let me go with this. Would you just mind having a conversation with her? 5 minutes, that's all. That way she doesn't jump on me. person usually says, well, okay, I'll do you the favor. Person has the conversation, calls me back and says, I've had that conversation, I still say no. I said, I know, thank you very much for doing that. I just talked to her. She thinks 5 more minutes would be really good. What do you think? And we continue this choreographed dance until we get to the point that we know that it really is a solid no, or we kind of have that crack that says the conversation needs to continue. And then we continue, okay? So know that that's going to happen. And we'll choreograph each and every one of those, but know that you're going to have to join me in that process. In the recruitment phase, I need you also to suspend judgment. You know, one of the questions you'll be asked as a committee that I'll be asked a lot is, how big is the pool? Who cares? If we have 100 people and none of them are qualified, you don't have a pool. You have 100 bodies, but you don't have a pool. If you have 3 or 4 and they're all qualified and they're all stellar, does it really matter? Not really. If they're right on target and they're exactly what you need, then that's your pool. Then you got the best pool possible. So I need you not to get fixated on numbers. Now, it's not to say that there won't be big numbers, that's not it. But I could get you a lot of numbers. I could get you a lot of people applying. But it's not worth it if they're not what you're looking for. It just isn't. It just means you got more paper to go through. So my focus is going to be on getting you the best candidates. So I'm not really concerned about what the numbers are going to be. I'm more concerned with making sure that you get the best candidates. I am concerned about diversity because of your university, the demographics, the changing demographics and so forth. I want to make sure that there's a strong sense of diversity there. That's important to me. The quality of the people is extremely important to me. So know that I'm going to be focusing on those 2 items. I'm not going to be focusing so much on whether or not you have 50, 60, 70, 100, because it really doesn't make much difference. Okay? So as we do that part of the process of recruitment, the end result is a candidate pool that you're able to then review. Talked a little bit about this during our first session about what does it mean when we have the sunshine laws that we need to be cognizant of? And the answer is still the same. You'll get fewer presidents. You'll get some people who might be a bit skittish. We'll work through that. The sitting presidents are going to be kind of tough because their boards usually don't respond well when they know that the presidents are looking at other places. That's a one-shot opportunity. They better be sure they get it. But that doesn't mean that you can't get really strong candidates. And so our job is to find those really strong candidates, including those presidents. So it doesn't mean we don't go after them. Just know that we're going to be turned down more frequently by the presidents than any other group. But it does not mean we don't go after them. We go after them full-fledged, but we're going to do that. Okay? So that's the second phase. So I've talked about the first 2 phases. It's a lot of information I just tossed at you. Let me stop for a second, grab a drink, and ask if you have any questions of me so far in the first two phases. Any questions? My mentor teacher would be so proud during my high school days of teaching. That means I taught well. This is good.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I feel like I should ask a question, so you do get to drink. So in your experience, Mr. Pimentel, where have the greatest challenges been in this process, in particular when it comes to dealing with a search committee? What's been your greatest challenge?
There are 2 or 3. The first has to do with honesty. And that is, folks in higher education tend to be very, very polite. And because it is education, we like to see the possibility in everyone. But sometimes candidates just don't have what you're looking for. And so if they don't have it, we need to be honest to say, this isn't it. It's okay to keep looking. You hear the concept of a failed search, right? Failed searches do exist. But usually the title is given at the wrong time. So someone will say, well, you have a failed search when you went out, you sought candidates, and you didn't find the candidate that you were looking for on the first try. And they'll say, that's a failed search. I don't know, that's not my definition of a failed search. My definition of a failed search is moving forward with a candidate when you know the candidate is not what you're looking for. What's really a failed search is then appointing that person and then expecting that something different is going to transpire. That's a failed search. To say you're not happy with the pool, to say that your standards are high enough that none of them meet the standard and you want to do it again, that's not a failed search. That's a search that needs to continue. And so the honesty piece, what ends up happening often is people get so caught up in the moment with the candidates, and they almost convince themselves that we have to take one of these candidates. No, you don't. If they're not good enough for you, toss them back in and say, thank you very much. We enjoyed meeting you. You're not what we're looking for. We're going to keep looking. And so that lack of honesty and that openness to say, you know, it's not what we're looking for. You're a nice person, but you're not it. We need to have that honesty. We need to be able to openly say, in a very polite way, this isn't going to work. We need to keep looking. Okay, that's number one, because that gets you in big trouble. The second piece that is a challenge is that often committees misread the situation the candidate's in and only view it from the perspective of the committee, of the university. An example is when someone is saying, no, I can't do this. And you don't take the time to figure out, why are they saying no? Anyone in sales will tell you, you know, you got to figure out what the trigger mechanism is there. Why is the person saying no? And then taking it personally and saying, well, forget that person, we won't do that. Rather than taking the time to understand, what is that mental hurdle that we need to get over in order to get that person in? If the person's a strong candidate, then you bend over backwards and try to figure out different angles in which to address the concerns they might have, which means that you have to do less selling and more listening. And often what happens in these search processes is we get so excited about just moving the process forward because it says so in the timeline that you end up pursuing candidates that say yes versus the one that you really ought to be going after and working harder to get. And that's important to do in this type of a search. And then the last piece for this type of a process is not being open with the candidates about what this public disclosure is going to look like. And so one day they wake up and they realize that they've been exposed in manners that they would have been okay with had someone told them. But they're not okay with because no one explained the process to them. So we need to be very explicit as to what it's going to look like, how it's going to feel, so that there are no surprises. Okay. Does that help?
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Pimentel, for being here. I definitely appreciate your perspectives on how this process is going to go. My question to you, because you had mentioned about the pool, and you said that how big is that pool going to be? Let's say for any member on the committee, if we're addressed by someone on the campus community of how big is that pool, how do you recommend we answer those questions?
And you're going to be asked. Mm-hmm. Right. At some point, luckily, now here's the nice part, because it's open meetings, open records, they're going to know how big the pool is, right? What I would like you to do is focus on the quality of the pool. You can tell them the numbers because the numbers are going to be public anyway, so there's no secret. But what I'd like to do is focus on quality, and be able to state to them, we're focusing on building the best quality pool possible. And so we're not so concerned about the numbers as much as we are concerned about the quality. And we're going to continue to look and develop that pool until such time that we're excited about it. Right? And so you're answering the question, and maybe not in the most direct manner, but it's the most honest manner. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
'Cause, I don't think anyone's going to fault you by for saying that you're holding out for the best candidates. I don't think anyone's going to criticize that, right? Not only that, but one of the positive aspects of the search process, you keep telling folks, hey, we're going to hold out for the best candidates. You say it enough times, people start saying, hey, you know what? Maybe we deserve the best candidate. And maybe you're not good enough. Nothing personal, but maybe you're not what we really want. And you start changing how people perceive themselves. Because sometimes in searches what happens is people predict the future by looking at the past. If you had a search process that you weren't particularly excited about, you kind of project forward and say, well, that's what we're going to get this time around. Well, you do if that's the path where you're going. If you do nothing different, probably you will. But what you have to do is start thinking about, what do we really deserve? And think big. And then let's go after that individual. Why settle from the beginning? I don't get it, right? And so when I work with committees and they tell me about what may have happened in the past search or the search prior to that or whatever, okay. But that's not gonna predict the future. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, it could work that way, but it doesn't have to. And so we're gonna stay away from that. Now, I have no idea how your searches have gone in the past, so I'm not making a commentary on what may have happened in the past, but I am making a commentary about what we need to do going forward. And I think that as long as we keep telling folks, we're gonna keep focusing on quality and we're gonna let the quality of the bull dictate how quickly we move and not the calendar necessarily, then I think people get it. And I think we just have to keep focusing on quality. Okay? Other questions? Yes, sir.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Pimentel.
Pleasure.
I really appreciated your sort of opening remarks because it sort of helped crystallize how these candidates are going to think, especially when you're recruiting, and the obstacles to jumping in the race. And I guess my question is more of, I want to ask you about, if this is a concern. So I would think if you're recruiting somebody and they decide to make the jump, they're in it to win it. And how big of a concern is it? Well, let me back up. What I don't want to happen is at the end of the search, we present, and I clarified with Chair C, we can present somewhere between 3 to 5 candidates. And you hear anecdotal information about, in stories of other universities where they loved one candidate or loved one or two. They present them, the top contenders drop out, and then they're sort of stuck with somebody that they weren't terribly excited about but was acceptable. And I hope we can avoid that. Is that a real concern? I mean, can the search process really sort of ferret out these folks that, not necessarily from the get-go, they're just looking to leverage the opportunity to get a better package from their Board of Trustees, but I mean, is that a real concern that we need to be worried about, and is there a way to address that really early in the process?
It is real. Know that for some institutions, especially public institutions, the only way to get additional compensation is if you actually have an offer from someone else. Not that you're being courted, but you actually have an offer. And so in order for the individual to get the offer, they have to be very creative and very convincing. That happens. That happens every once in a while, not very frequently, to be honest with you. What is a bigger issue is that as the candidate progresses from one stage to the next, they sort of forget to bring their family along. It's always surprising to me how a candidate says, my spouse or partner doesn't want to move to that part of the state or that part of the country. Because my response has always been, since we started the search process, the university hasn't moved. It's still in the same city. Still in the same city today. Guess what? It'll be in the same city tomorrow. How did your family not know? When you were taking off on the weekends, when you were taking off and coming to meet with us, did they not know where you were going? I mean, how does this conversation all of a sudden start at the 11th hour? That does happen. I don't know how it happens, but it happens. And so to try to avoid that, we tried up front, constantly telling the candidate, where's the family? Where's your family in this process? How supportive are they of this? Do they know about this move? Do they know about what it's going to take to relocate? Have they thought about it? Have you started having these kind of conversations so that we minimize the risk of the personal issues becoming the problem? Okay, so we'll do that. The second issue that pops up at the last minute is often a candidate will have second thoughts as to whether or not this is the right move for them. That part is legitimate. The part that the families don't know that they're going to be relocating, that one always surprises me, always blows me away. But the part where an individual comes to the realization that this isn't the right match, that to me is legitimate, because it is a process, and it's a process of discernment. And one of the risks that we take is that that candidate comes to the realization this isn't the right fit. One of the risks they take is that at the 11th hour, we come to the realization that they're not a right fit. That's why I say that one's legitimate, right? And if that happens, I respect that, because it is a process, supposed to figure it out. Now, to counterbalance that is we don't want to put forward anyone that you're not excited about. And that is the bigger task, is you don't want to do that, because they could pick anyone they wish, right? Or they may have a different opinion as to who's number one. And therefore you end up with someone you're not really excited about, right? So the way to avoid it is several things. One is we bring people along, make sure that their families know what's happening. Second is try to help the candidate. This is where I come in. Try to help the candidate figure it out earlier in the process, whether or not they're going to be a right fit for this organization. And I'm talking about before they get to the finalist stage, right? Third is we need to be very open and honest about the challenges and the opportunities. Often when the candidate drops out at the last minute, it's because someone didn't present them with all the information they needed. And then they find out information at the last minute, and then they say, gosh, if I would have known this, I would never have gone forward, right? And so we want to make sure we share all the information appropriately at the appropriate time, but early on, so the candidate can make that informed decision, right? The next thing we need to do in order to minimize that is, as we look at the pool going forward, to see whether or not, what level of excitement do you have? Are you only excited about the top two? Or are you really excited about the top four? Right? And if you're not excited about the top four, then we better better call a timeout and have a conversation about how we strengthen the pool, right? The last thing I would say is that in order to minimize that risk, we need to be very clear with the candidates about what this process is going to look like at every stage. Because you'll find that sometimes candidates didn't realize that they were going to have to make a decision when the decision point came. They weren't aware of it. You might find that a bit incredulous, but it is amazing how many times individuals thought, oh, I thought we were still just investigating. I thought we were just still checking each other out. When in reality is, no, it's decision time. And so we need to be very clear about that so that they reach that decision point earlier in the process. And that helps minimize the risk that you're talking about. That risk is always there, but we can minimize it. Does that help?
Very much so. Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions?
Sure. Mr. Pimentel, thank you for helping us with this search. We look forward to working very closely with you and finding that great pool of candidates. So in the recruitment phase, what role does or doesn't personal influencers of the candidates play? In other words, like in my line of business, when we're checking out the character and background of potential players to join our team, we go into their neighborhoods, we go into their families, we go into their influencers to either try to influence them to come our way or to utilize them as part of the background process. So what role do influencers of the candidates play in this process?
Officially, nothing. Unofficially, a lot. Absolutely, without a doubt. It's not uncommon for us to look at who are the person's mentors? Who is this person getting advice from? And then I go talk to them in order to help them and help them have the right mindset about the institution, about the opportunity, so then they could advise appropriately, right? So we absolutely do that. It's not uncommon for me to talk to spouses and partners and say, let's have a conversation. How can I help you with this decision, right? It's not uncommon for me to talk to, if say we're recruiting a dean, I'll talk to their provost. I'll talk to their fellow deans. I'll talk to the president in order to help them understand. But it's a two-way street, as you know, because part of it is you're learning something too, right? And sometimes what you learn is not what you were hoping to learn, right? But you'd rather know it than not know it. In which case, then you move in the other direction of how do we disengage in a polite way, right? But it's quite important. And in higher education, because it's a closed network, even more so. Individuals still very much rely on their mentors. And regardless of how many years of experience they have, they usually have a group of mentors. I was just helping an individual who just been appointed to a presidency last night, and I had to talk to 6 of their mentors, right? Well, not even the search I'm doing, but just to help that individual figure out which is the right opportunity, right? Same kind of thing. So very critical. Officially, everyone will say it doesn't exist. Unofficially, oh yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. Any other questions? All right, so let's move on to the next step of the process. So in the first 2 steps, the first step, I need your participation quite a bit. Second step, I need some of your participation, especially those who I'll be calling on to help me nudge someone forward. Now, the third step is all about you. The third step is the assessment phase. And in the assessment phase, this is where we review the backgrounds of all the candidates that we've recruited. This is where we do the paper screening. That paper screening then leads to the identification of a group of candidates that you wish to interview. Though that then leads to the actual interviews. This is the first round interviews. You know, sometimes they're called airport interviews. It's a misnomer. We don't do that anymore, but it's a first round interview, right? And this is where the candidates come before you, usually a large slate of candidates, and usually anywhere from 6 on the low end, 12 on the high end, and you interview them. You interview them for about an hour in order to get a better sense of who they are, to see how their paperwork might match them, get a better sense of their energy level, their enthusiasm for the position, whether or not they did any homework about the university, whether or not they're invested, and for you to then formulate an opinion and identify the candidates that you're most interested in. Okay. Now, you need to keep in mind that there are several junctures where you have ultimate veto power. So let me tell you where they are. And I'm going to ask you to use that not judiciously. I want you to use it freely. First part is going to be when I bring the candidates to you and you're examining their paperwork. First time when you get to tell me, Alberto, they're not what we're looking for. In which case you tell me that, I go back to step number 2 and we start all over again. Okay? Please don't worry about whether or not you're going to hurt my feelings or whether or not, oh my gosh, Alberto brought them forward, therefore we ought to move forward with them. No. My job is to bring them forward. Your job is to kick them out. Your job is to push them forward if they're what you're looking for. So your first opportunity to say, not good enough, let's do it again, is when I bring you the paperwork, right? Now, something about the paperwork. Candidates are kind of odd sometimes in the sense that even though they know it's an open process, they feel a little bit antsy, so they'll just give us their CV. Others will give us their CV and letters. And sometimes the committee takes affront to that and says, oh my gosh, how invested is this individual if they didn't prepare a letter? And I've seen over the years a lot of committees say, well, since he didn't prepare the letter, they therefore must not be interested in us, therefore we're going to exclude them from the process. let me ask you to refrain from doing that. We'll figure out whether or not the person's really invested, but a letter is maybe one way of checking that out. But if you think about it from the process perspective of, I'm talking to somebody who wasn't interested in the job, was not in the job market to begin with, and so therefore wasn't thinking about it, their evolution in terms of figuring out where they are as a candidate, it takes time. And so they may just be at that point where they're saying, okay, I'm willing to take a look, I'm willing to share my resume. I'm not quite ready to write a letter yet, but I am interested. Please don't perceive that as them being lazy or not wanting to engage. It's where they are in their thought process. Our job is to continue to motivate them to bring them in. Keep in mind, you could always push them out later, but if there's someone that is stellar, don't lose a good candidate because they haven't yet written a letter. And for individuals on faculty, they're used to faculty searches, and that usually is what you see. But please know at this level, it's not uncommon. Okay. So the first opportunity. Second opportunity is going to be after you meet them. After you have a conversation with them. You know, we've all been there where individuals look stellar on paper. I mean, absolutely stellar. And then you spend 3 minutes with them and you go like, what? How did this happen? This person doesn't match the paperwork. What was I drinking when I brought this person forward, right? It happens. It happens because sometimes candidates have wonderful, stellar backgrounds, but they're just not very strong in terms of their interpersonal skills. And so what we want to do is use that opportunity as a second opportunity for you to say, not good enough. And if you say not good enough, the only thing I'm going to ask you is, what was missing? What did we miss? What did you not see? What would you like to see more of? The search process is a process, and part of that process means that as much as candidates are discerning what they want, so is the committee. You might agree on the same 10 priorities, but the more you talk about it, the more you think about it, the order of the priorities may shift. And therefore, you need somebody with a different type of quality. It's okay if that happens. It's a process. It's supposed to happen. And just as I don't expect every one of you to agree with each other about a candidate, I expect there to be spirited debate. If that doesn't happen, this will be the first committee in my 25 years where it doesn't happen. There's supposed to be disagreement because you're approaching it from different perspectives. We want to encourage that. And no, I'll be taking notes furiously because what I'm looking at is, all right, what was that voice of that person who was speaking in the minority? The only person that had that perspective about this particular candidate. I want to know what that is. Because that person's picking up something about a candidate, and even if the candidate goes forward, when we do references, I want to check out that one issue. Because what I've learned over the years is when someone reacts, especially if it's a strong reaction, even if their voice is in a minority, there's something there. And I just need to look for it. And I just need to make sure that it's not detrimental to that person's success. Okay? So just know that you have that opportunity at that point in time to say, not good enough. And if it's not good enough, all right, we take a deep breath, we go back to step number 2, we start all over again. Know that we will continue. I'm here for the long haul, folks. My job is to get you the best candidate, not to close a search. I could close a search with a monkey. That doesn't mean that they're the right candidate, right? So what we want to do is make sure that we go back and forth until you get the right candidate. And in this case, the right group of candidates to move forward. Okay? Does that make sense? So please don't feel hesitant to voice your concern or dislike or displeasure about a candidate. Let's get the right candidate. When this is happening, what you're not seeing taking place behind the scenes is that my team is doing background checks on the candidates. So the minute you identify a candidate as someone you're possibly interested in, know that my team starts doing the social media checks, we start doing the LexisNexis checks, we start seeing what's out there, we start putting our feelers out to see what we can learn about the candidate, good or bad. and then we present it to you unfiltered. Because then you need to make a decision, especially if the information is going to have a material impact on the quality of the candidate and what the candidate's able to do. You need to have that information. It's your decision. It's not my call to filter that information out and say, well, you know, heck, they don't need to know that. I'm going to tell you it all. And then you have to figure out whether or not it's going to have an impact in your decision making. The second thing that we will do is, as you're moving from one level to the next, is in addition to the background checks, and please know that during this process, we do the background checks 4 different times. And we do that, you know, some might think it's an overkill, and it is. Admittedly, it's more excessive than it's necessary, unless you've ever been burnt, in which case, it's not enough. And so for those of us who have been in the business long enough, we've been burnt. It's not enough. I'll do 5 times if I have to. I'd rather do it than not do it, right? And the reason we would like to do it, or I like to do it often, is really this. Candidates forget to tell us when they get in trouble. Somehow it slips their mind. I don't know why, it just, you know, it doesn't surface. And so, because it slips their mind, I want to be that gentle reminder that tells them I need to know. Because as much as I don't want them to be embarrassed, I don't want you to be embarrassed as well. And so know that even before we bring a candidate pool to you, we will have already done some preliminary background checks. Now, the background checks aren't perfect. That's the downside. They're not perfect. Candidates live very, very complicated lives, and not everything they do surfaces immediately. You need to look at some of the universities across the country who are dealing with issues of 10 and 20 years ago that never surfaced, right? So what we try to do is find out as many of those issues as possible, and we want to do that before we make them public, because we don't want the press figuring it out for us, right? I invite the press to do those checks, but I want to make sure what they're going to see beforehand so that we're not embarrassed. And we, meaning all of us, are not embarrassed. Okay? If there's anything that you ever, as in any part of this process, if there's anything you need about, information you need about candidates, please ask. That's your right as a committee member. You should ask, especially if you think it's going to impact your decision making. So please let me know. Assuming that you are happy with the candidates at that point in time, the next phase of the process is, and that's the selection phase. During the selection phase, a couple of things happen. Candidates generally come to campus and meet with a series of campus constituents. We set up these meetings. We want that interaction to take place. We also want to make sure that we collect feedback from the campus constituents. It's at this phase that we're also starting to talk to the candidates about what their expectations are, not only of the job, but in order to close the deal. Know that that conversation starts when they become semifinalists. It intensifies when we go to finalist stage, because the last thing we want is someone coming into this process, to a point you were making earlier, going all the way to the process and say, you know, the package isn't what I don't find it acceptable, therefore I'm not going to do it. Now we've wasted our time, right? So again, we want to minimize the risk of that. Okay. It's at that point in time that we also let candidates know that the intensity is going to be ramped up, because once they're one of the 3 or 4 finalists, well, everyone's going to be looking into their background. Not just us. Every faculty member, a member of the board, you name it, press, everyone's going to be looking. And so we let them know. It's part of my regular speech where I just say, if there's anything I should know, now would be a really good time to know. We could get out ahead of it right now, but if we discover it as a matter of a background check, you are done. Because at that point, there's no rebounding. I can't explain to somebody that you forgot about that criminal charge you had. I can't explain to somebody that you did X. It's too late. And so we have those discussions with the candidates. At some point then, the board is going to want to have some time with the candidates and have a further discussion. And we will work with them, with the board, as frequently as necessary. Every board does it a little differently. Some want to just do it all in one day. Others want to spend many, many hours with a candidate, multiple conversations. Whatever that might look like, then that's what we want to do. Usually at that point, the board will move forward in making a selection. However, there are times when the board says, not good enough. We would hope that we don't get to that point. We would hope that at the committee level, we've done such a thorough screening that anyone that moves forward should be appointable, should be someone that makes you happy. Okay? So this is why it's critical that you not forego your authority to have veto power, because once it leaves your committee, you no longer have that veto power. And if they have to veto it because they're not happy with the quality of the pool, that means we didn't do our job well. Let me tell you, that's not going to happen. That will not happen. We will take great pains to make sure that does not happen. Okay. Now, as we elevate from the third to the fourth phase, we're also doing more in-depth background checks and references. Now, candidates always like to provide me their list of references. I'm more than happy to take it, but maybe for a different reason than they might think. I want to see who's not on the list. I'm happy to see who's on the list, but I want to talk to people who aren't on the list. Right? So if the person's a provost and didn't give me names of people on their board or didn't give me the names of the president for me to talk to, I'm a curious guy. I want to know why. And at that point, it can't be because I don't want my president to know, because the name would have been already public. So I want to know why. And then I want to go talk to that individual. If the person's a provost and doesn't give me any deans, I want to talk to deans. I want to know why subordinates weren't included on the list, right? So I'm more interested in who's not on the list than who is. And so we will do those references. We will also ask that if any information surfaces when faculty do their calls, because faculty are going to pick up the phone and call, I would hope, and something surfaces, we would hope that they would channel it through the committee chair or through us, so we could figure out whether or not there's validity to what is being said. Sometimes what happens in the reference checking process, especially when faculty and staff pick up the phone, is they pick up information that is factually true but incomplete. So let me tell you what that means. So if we turn the clock back a little bit to when the economy had a meltdown. If you look across the country, especially at public institutions, the options were really dire. Individuals at institutions were having to make decisions that under normal circumstances they would never have made. Programs were being eliminated. Faculty who were tenured faculty were being removed from their positions were being cut, they were being laid off or fired. And in higher education, as you know, laying off or firing a tenured faculty member, a senior professor, that's not done very often. But if you turn the clock back to that period of time, entire departments were being obliterated. And it was because we had to save the whole, right? And so you had to cut departments. At the point in time when that was done, everyone understood. I know I've dealt with a provost recently who, during his tenure, had the choice between closing down the Multicultural Center or the Student Success Center. One of them had to go. Under normal circumstances, he would never have done either one. But the budget requirement and the statement from the president was one of them has to go. So he had to shut down the Multicultural Center. Now, he made other arrangements to absorb the services that were being provided. But here it is, 10 years later. Guess what everybody forgot? Everyone forgot how difficult and dire that time was. And that individual is now saddled with, he's a bad guy. You know, he doesn't believe in diversity. He shut down the multicultural center. So factually, it's true, but it's incomplete. And so what we want to do is make sure that we treat candidates fairly. Now, if the person really has done something that's heinous, we ought to know about it. Now, if the story is incomplete, then I just want to make sure we get the other side of the story. And then the board can decide whether or not it's an issue or how they want to deal with it. But it's important for us to make sure that the full context in which someone has made a decision is explored, so that we could determine whether or not it's something really bad or if just a matter of circumstance. Sometimes it's bad, but sometimes really it's an incomplete story. Okay, so we will do that. We'll work with trying to bring the search to closure. We'll do all the background checks. We'll do all the criminal investigation, all those other things that we need to do in order to make sure that the candidate is a candidate that's appointable. Okay, that brings the search to a close. Now, that said, we want to make sure that the candidates are also poised for success. What does that mean? Well, it is not going to be uncommon, especially in today's environment, for individuals who decide to accept another job to have to leave their current employer sooner than expected. In the past, that wasn't the case. In the past, someone would say, I have this job now, I'm going to finish up the semester, I'm going to finish up the academic year, and I'll be there in 6 months. Not the case today. So just know that is going to look different today than it did in the past. And here's the reason why. Individual goes to their employer and says, hey, I am going to be the president of the University of Central Florida. And their employer is going to say, thank you very much, when can you leave? And it's nothing personal. It's a budget situation, and it's the reality that they say, if you're going to be that president, the reality is you're already gone. Mentally, you've already checked out. You're thinking about that institution. So if you're going to think about that institution, then that institution ought to pay your salary, because you're going to be spending more time thinking about them than you are thinking about us. And so please know that should that occur, it's not a commentary on the candidate. It's just the reality. And if you're at the university that is losing that individual, you're looking at it from a couple of different perspectives. One is, how much money can I save? Because I could bring in a dean, give him a small stipend. I'm going to save that person's salary for the next 6 months, maybe a year, 6 months until the end of the semester or the end of the year, plus the search, another 6 months for the search. My gosh, I get to save, $500,000. It's a financial thing. The other part is frankly one of, we still need to move forward, and if that person's already checked out and thinking about the other institution, we're going to be on hover mode anyway. So let's move them out. So please know it's really more of that than anything else. Okay. Any question about any part of this process so far?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you for coming over and talking to us today. The question that I have is, when we reach this selection phase, can we go back? You brought in 4 candidates, none of them is, or maybe very few of them, are as good as you expected them to be from the 1-hour interview, and you want to go back to your pool. Do you do that? Or it looks embarrassing?
I don't worry about looks. Let me tell you, what's more embarrassing is finding somebody that you don't want. So here's what you do. Here's the reality. It's very rarely that you go back to the pool. You could go back to the pool. But the way I see it is, if you didn't like the persons in the pool to begin with, if they weren't in your top 3 or 4, why would you go back to them? If you're not happy after you interview them, I'd rather go out and recruit a whole new set of candidates. Because here's the funny thing about search. You don't like the pool? Give it 30 days. It'll look different. And it's really true, because individuals who may have said no to you initially because of timing issues or because of personal circumstances, things change. So if you don't like it, go back, go start again. So once you've determined, you always have this thing of, well, we'll just go back to the pool. I kind of look at it as saying, gosh, if you were really excited about someone there, you would have moved them forward the first time out, right? So I may be wrong, but I usually like to go back and say, well, you can look at it, but you're not likely to find somebody there, so let me go out and find you a new set of candidates. right? But your point's well taken. If you don't like them, we go back and we do it again. But know that I usually feel very uncomfortable just going back to the pool, because now I do feel like you're settling. Because I feel if that person really stood out the first time, you would have interviewed them, right? So if you didn't like them the first time, what has changed in their paperwork to make you like them now? You know? So kind of yes, but with a bit of a spin. We go back and we look for more. Any other questions?
Hi. During the recruitment phase, when you're approaching people, people approaching you, at what point do their individual names become public in that process?
So the two answers to that question, so I'm going to give you both, okay? There's going to be a group of individuals who are going to apply. And they have no concern about their names going forward, and so they're going to apply. The minute they apply, anybody asks, names go forward. I mean, their names can be made public, right? The candidates that will be recruited aren't going to do that. What they're going to do is they're going to wait till the last day, the last minute, and they're going to say, okay, when is the deadline? When do you need to share with the board? When do you have to share with the committee, rather? And I promise you that evening at the 11th hour, I will get a barrage of applications coming in. Excuse me. And part of it is because they know that once they give it to me, it's going to be public, right? Does that preclude them from talking to me? No. What will happen is this. Individuals will engage in conversations with me. They will tell me, I may be interested, but I'm not going to make my full decision until the deadline. But between now and the deadline, you and I, Alberto, ought to have a lot of conversations. Right? They may send me their CV, and they're going to say, Alberto, this is for your firm's files. See if you like what you see there. For one of your, maybe one of your clients. But they're never going to mention the University of Central Florida. The reason for that is until they declare their candidacy, we don't have to disclose who they are. We could have these conversations, but the minute they say, Alberto, here's my CV, and it is for the University of Central Florida presidential search, they are now a candidate, whether they like it or not. So as long as they don't mention it, as long as they say I'm exploring other professional opportunities, we're okay. Okay. So, but know that once they give me any document specifically for this search, they're public. They could be public at any point. And that's what I mean about informing candidates about the process so they understand that. Because in most other searches, they could give me a letter, they could give me their CV, and they could explore it, and their names wouldn't be public. And as a result of that, they could at the 11th hour just say, I've changed my mind. And there would be zero damage to them. In this case, the minute they give me something that is specific for this search, they're a candidate. Okay. Any other questions? All right. So let me suggest a couple of things as we start to recruit. I mentioned that the target population, there are several areas that we go to find candidates. And know that I start from the premise that you're looking for someone that has strong academic roots. Now, throughout my next couple of days and the next visit that I come in December, that may not be the case. Maybe someone says, oh no, we need someone with a different kind of background, what we would call a non-traditional background, right? This would be someone outside of higher education. I don't get the sense that that's where you're going, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay, so I'm open to being convinced, and I'll take it with the direction that you want me to go in. But for now, let me just focus on the academics until I hear differently. Okay, so on the academic side, there are several different types of candidates that we would go after, or individuals in different categories. And let me tell you what they are. And that way, if there's a category that just doesn't seem to interest you, let me know now. Doesn't mean no forever, just means no today. I'm going to go after sitting presidents. I have to. Understand that that's going to be the group that's going to be the least likely to respond in a positive way, but But I have to go after them because maybe there's that one individual out there that is a stellar individual that says, I want to be at an institution where I could build. And I don't want to preclude them or make any assumptions. So I'm going to go after them. The second group, of course, is the sitting provost. Now, in each one of these categories, I'm looking at current and former, right? Because there are some individuals who have served as president and are now the head of an association or something for whom this might make sense. So I'll look at current and former provosts. It's the group that you're likely to get the highest level of participation. The third group is looking at sitting deans. And usually what we do is we look at the colleges that you have within the university and find deans from corresponding colleges. Now, usually if you're going to go to the dean level, then the person needs to have been exemplary in their work and needs to already demonstrate the capacity to serve in the executive position. There are several deans that usually fall in that category, more so than others, and it's primarily because of the way their schools are structured. So usually the deans, and by the way, you should know that many deans prefer to be the president than to be the provost. Most would want to bypass the provost position. There are a lot of reasons for it, and someday over coffee I'll tell you what they are, but there's a lot of reasons why they prefer to skip that role. But the deans that usually have who can make that leap, and when you see where the leap is usually individuals who come from schools of engineering, schools of letters, arts, and sciences, or arts and sciences, and schools of business. Those are the ones that you normally see people leapfrog over. And some of it makes a lot of sense. Not exclusively, but usually. Arts and sciences makes a ton of sense because usually if you're a dean of arts and sciences, somewhere between 2/3 or 70% of all the students grace your doorways at some point in time. It's the largest school usually on the campus. And so it makes sense. The large school, large faculty, interdisciplinary in nature, large budgets, and they're usually involved in fundraising. And so they're already they feel like they are like mini presidents already. And, truth be told, in many cases that's true. Deans of engineering become presidents quite frequently because if you look at most sitting presidents, especially of research universities, they tend to come from the sciences. They come from one of the STEM areas. And engineering is one of the powerhouses. And they tend to come from engineering, one, because the colleges in research universities are usually very large and complex. They're already interdisciplinary in nature. And those individuals are doing a ton of work in fundraising. And those individuals usually have a tremendous amount of connection to the outside world. And if institutions are focused on building their STEM areas, then having someone who comes from the sciences or from engineering makes a lot of sense. So know that that's one of the areas where you'll see a lot of individuals come from. The business area is the third area, and the reason that they are quite popular is that on the assumption, now business schools tend to be small relative to the other schools. But usually what happens with business schools is, especially the more prominent ones, is you'll see the individuals heavily involved in industry, heavily involved in the state, heavily involved in fundraising, heavily involved in exterior activities similar to what a president would be involved in. And usually the assumption is that if someone's coming from business, that they have a good understanding of the financial aspect of an institution. And sometimes that's true. And so that's why you see those three. Now, the other schools, it's not that the other deans from other schools don't make it to the finalists. They do, just on a less regular basis. And often it's because they're not as interdisciplinary. Often it's because their colleges may be small. Often because there is a tendency to lean towards the STEM areas versus the humanities and social sciences. Every university does it a little differently, but just know that those are kind of the prejudices that you'll see. But we're going to look at the deans. The other category that usually makes sense Interesting thing, because it's only been recent that it has made sense, is the VPs of research and innovation that come out of major universities. Now, historically, that has not been a place where you look for presidents. In fact, it's only been in the last 3 years that there's really been any effort to do that. In fact, in the last 3 years, if you look across the country, there are more former vice presidents of research sitting as presidents and provosts, just in the last 3 years that have been appointed, than there has been in the last 20 years collectively. The reason for that is really simple in some ways. Not necessarily good, but it's simple. The reason for it is that the candidate pools for presidential searches has been really rather shallow in the last couple of years. And as committees look at candidates and they say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to take this dean who's only been a dean for 3 years, and I just said that the VPs of research have not been a target. Those individuals have been in the roles for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, which means that they're part of the cabinet, they're part of the senior leadership team, and today's VPs of research are engaging heavily, not in fundraising, but in economic development issues. They're engaging in areas of innovation, tech transfer, all these other things, the creation of new ideas and products. And so they have now become targeted for these roles. And so as a result of that, what has happened is, as committees look at it and say, well, gosh, I have a dean that's only been a dean for 3 years, but I could get this vice president who's been a vice president for 5 or more years, I'll roll the dice with someone who has been at that senior executive level already. And that's why they become much more attractive in recent years. Okay? So we'll look at those. Now you might think, well, okay, that's where we stop. No, that's where we start. Because if that's all I do for you, I could tell you right now, we might as well just take diversity off the table, because we're not going to find it. Because it's in the pipeline, but it's not yet there. We'll find them more in the deans, but as it starts going higher, the numbers start to decrease rather significantly, both women and minorities. And so we have to think a little bit more creatively. So here's the other places we're going to go. You start looking at places like foundations, because what you'll find in foundations is that you do have individuals who come from the academy who are now heads of foundations or vice presidents of foundations, and these are individuals who have been presidents and provosts at major universities. You look at places like the Gates Foundation, you look at other Mellon Foundation, you look at the big foundations, you're going to find that you have individuals with strong academic roots. Second is you look at those institutions that focus on a specific group but are higher education related. Howard Hughes Medical Institute is a prime example of that. These are institutions that are quasi-foundations but really serve a research purpose and encourage research, and you'll find that they are littered with a lot of folks coming from the academy. You look at the federal government. Now, normally you wouldn't look at the federal government for academics, but if you look at the department, if you look at the alphabet soup, Department of Energy, the DOD, the DARPA, you look at NIH, NSF, you look at any of those branches, you're going to find that there are a lot of strong academics in and among those ranks who are doing a service to the country, and so therefore have taken time away from their administrative functions at their universities and populate those ranks. So we need to take a look at those. We need to take a look at individuals coming from the national laboratories. You know, years past, that wouldn't be where we would go. However, what has happened in the last 5 or so years is there's been a lot more cross-pollination, right? You have people going from one to the other in ways that we didn't do before. And so it makes sense to look at them. And again, may not be all of them. I mean, you may not want someone who, makes nuclear bombs for a living. That may not be the right person for you. But there are other leaders there who have deep academic backgrounds who make sense. An individual I placed years ago, a guy named Steve Chu. Steve is a Nobel laureate, was at Stanford. We recruited him to the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab to be the director of the lab. But for the, 30 some odd years prior, he was an academic and a highly noted one. And then he went off to become the Secretary of Energy, right? Well, you look at individuals like that that have been in these other places, but who have done some amazing things. So we have to look at those individuals. We also need to look at the professional associations. Because you'll find that in professional associations, they're often led by individuals who come from the academy. So you kind of get the sense that what I'm looking at is blowing up the traditional model of just looking at individuals who are already in the academy and saying that's not going to get you there. We got to think differently. You're going to need someone who's highly entrepreneurial here. Someone who sees the nexus between points that others don't see yet. That old saying, you got to see the invisible to accomplish the impossible. You need someone who can do that, who's able to say, wow, I see where the potential is, and if we just join them and configure them in a different way, we could be really doggone amazing. And that's what we need. And so as we look at that, we need to not only focus on the traditional pathways, but we need to broaden it up a little bit. Now, the purpose of this committee is to decide whether or not it's too broad, could be too big of a risk, or not risky enough. But I tell you, if all we do is look at individuals coming out of the academy, then we have taken away your responsibility as a committee to explore. And I think that every committee ought to explore. Let's see what's out there. You don't have to take them. You could tell me, Alberto, that person, no, that category doesn't work for me. Perfect. We won't go down there, but I'd like you to take a look at them first before you make that decision. Or before you say, anyone in that field doesn't work. Because there might be that one person that does. And at the end of the day, we're looking not for 10 people, we're looking for that one right person. And I want you to at least to take a look at them and then make that decision as to whether or not they're appropriate for you. Now, having said all that, have I missed anything? Now, the one category that I do dip into that sometimes folks don't like, but it's a good idea, is we look at industry, because there are individuals, especially coming out of high-tech, biotech, where you have individuals who have come from the academy and have gone into and started either companies or work in the R&D portion of a corporation that are perfectly suited for this. Pharma companies and the same thing, where we might find individuals that make any sense for this role. Again, I don't want to limit your opportunities. I want to stretch them out a little bit. You could always limit them, but I'd like to cast the net in a broad way. Now, having said that, how comfortable do you feel having me delve into all these different areas in order to identify the right pool of candidates? And is there one of those categories where you just say just automatically, that is just not going to work? What are your thoughts?
Madam Chair.
Sure. So I think it would be appropriate for me to answer this question. So I think that we're going to probably want to focus on academic candidates from the academy, but I think given the veto power description that you gave, I think that the broad net is appropriate. And so that's my short answer, in other words, because we're going to look at each candidate very carefully and look at their background and also look at the position and look at what exactly they're going to be doing, then I think that we should look at throw as wide a net as possible. But in general, my focus will be on trying to get the best, strong, probably more traditional academic candidate into the pool and into the position. So,
thank you.
I'm very supportive of the traditional academy as well, but I think we have to look outside that, Alberto. I think that I think we would do ourselves a disservice if we don't. And again, I think the focus should be on the academy, but there are just outlying superstars. And if you look, I mean, John Thrasher was not an academic, and he has taken FSU from number 43 in the country to number 18 in the country. You can't ignore that. He's the exception rather than the rule, but I think we do need to cast the broad net, as you said. My opinion.
Madam Chair, yes, I like your broad look at all these possibilities of attracting the future presidents of UCF. Have you thought about looking at, I'm assuming that you're looking primarily in the US or you're looking at other countries as well? The reason that I'm saying that is because sometimes I talk to faculty from top institutions here in the US, Caltech as an example, and they are telling me that they are losing some of their best faculty to Europe. Can we bring them back? So that's one thought that I thought about. And the other one is I don't know if you're going to look very closely to the national academies. I'm talking medicine, sciences, and engineering. I'm assuming, of course, the group that you're looking for, some of them would be National Academy members, but I'm wondering whether you're going to look at the academies more specifically.
Yeah, let me answer in both regards. You're absolutely right. Part of what has happened over the course of the last 15 or so years is that other countries have come in, and as they look to embellish and strengthen their current academic programs at their countries, they have come in and have taken a lot of good talent from here. The challenge has been not in going in that direction, it's in coming back. What a lot of those individuals found when they went out there to whatever country, whether it be Dubai or Australia or whatever, or New Zealand or wherever they might have gone, is that coming back is much harder than they thought. They went out as top scholars to help launch these institutions or strengthen them, and then they have a challenge coming back. And the reason they have a challenge coming back is that institutions wonder, okay, in the 5 years that you were away, how much has the game changed, right? So I think we will reach out to them, but know that usually I don't have a problem reaching out. Usually it's the committee that says, I don't know. 5 years is a long time, or 7 years is a long time. And heaven knows I've been in conversation with many, many individuals who were rock stars here, left, and just have not been able to come back. And
All guests have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
So we will look there. The National Academy, we look at, but usually we do it the other way around. With all due respect to the members of the academies, so we're talking about several. We're talking Institute of Medicine, National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, right? Those are the three usually that we focus on. The problem with individuals usually in those roles is that they became National Academy members because of the strength of the research. The challenge that we always find is finding those individuals that have the research component coupled with the administrative component. Because once you start looking at the academy, you'll find that most are wonderful researchers, but they don't have a lot of administrative experience. So we do go after them, but in the other direction. We look at the folks with the administration who happen to be members of the academy versus individuals who are members of the academy who happen to be administrators. But we're more than happy to look at it in the reverse as well. But our concern has always been the amount of administrative experience that they have. And second is whether or not they want to maintain a full portfolio of research, because often they don't. And we certainly have seen individuals who say, well, I want to spend half my day doing my research and the other half day being the president. And then I'll tell you, I know several who do that at major research universities, and I will tell you that they will say that it doesn't impact their ability to lead at all. But if you look at the provost and all the others who are standing behind them, they're all going like, oh no, that's not true. It does impact. But yes, so we will be looking at those members, but kind of in the other direction.
Alberto, Andre on the phone has a question.
Yes.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Guys hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes.
Hello? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so thanks for your time, and I appreciate the connections and comments about the various research organizations out there, executive leadership positions at research and commercialization offices at academic institutions, also at private organizations, senior executive service level positions at various government and military organizations. In your experience, have you seen difficulty in attracting those types of candidates, or I guess given their positions, are they more likely to apply relative to a sitting president at a university who's more reluctant to apply for reasons previously mentioned?
The biggest challenge that we have when attracting individuals outside of the academy, that even if they're academics, but they're outside the academy currently, is that the process itself sometimes is overwhelming for them. Meaning that if you're the CEO of a company, if you're the VP of research and development, you don't necessarily want to put yourself through a public process because it has the same negative impact at your corporation that it does in the other area. The challenge of recruiting individuals out of the NIH, NSF, especially those institutions, those two in particular, and their subsidiary units, is because if they have business, if the university has business before them and you're doing research, at some point they have to disclose that. They have to disclose early on so that there isn't a perception of conflict. And so those individuals sometimes feel a little uncomfortable outing themselves at a very, very initial phase of the process, right? And so some of them will feel very uncomfortable moving forward because of the process itself. And just know that is one of the, it's one of the other sides of just having an open process is, you have individuals who are going to be a bit hesitant because of the perception that they might create within their own organization. It's not a new issue, same issue, just in a different realm. But those are the only times we have challenges in recruiting those individuals.
Alberto, I just want to concur with a couple of the thoughts that have been expressed thus far. I totally agree that we need to start with the foundational principle of someone who has strong academic roots, member of the academy, et cetera. But I also think at this point of the process, we're at the beginning, okay? And we're looking for the best possible candidates, period. We want to find the best person, to be the leader of this university moving forward. And in saying that, I do think we have to cast the widest net possible. And I do think that it includes those from industry who have those strong academic roots, who perhaps have, and look, it may be a needle in a haystack sort of thing, but perhaps they were a dean somewhere and they jumped and became the CEO of a company and they've been a strong chief executive, right? And we all know, that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for a chief executive, right? And so I think at this point in the process, that net needs to be wide. And as we go through the process, we cull it down, obviously, with your expertise and, after we have the opportunity to evaluate, and ultimately each individual on this committee is going to have the voice to say, okay, I like this attribute, but this attribute's not strong enough, right? But I just do want to reiterate, I think at this point in the process, I think the net needs to be very wide.
Thank you. Yeah, in fact, if you look at UCSF, UC San Francisco several years ago had a chancellor who came from one of the big pharma companies. She was an academic initially, went and became an executive within the pharma company, came back to academe, served as a very successful chancellor, and then went back to a foundation and said, "Oh wow, this isn't the right location for me." But she did a heck of a job. Yeah. And you're right; it might be the needle in the haystack, but I think we do ourselves a disservice by not at least looking for that individual. Right.
Madam Chair. Yeah, one more question, maybe too premature at this point in time. When would be the time that you'll be accepting nominations from the community about these individuals?
Oh, immediately.
Okay.
And let me comment on that. Thank you for introducing that topic. So for the individuals who've been in the academic environment for decades, some of you are going to remember that in order to nominate somebody, you would write this wonderful letter of 3 or 4 pages and extolling that person's virtues and telling me why this person needed to be recruited or pursued for the position. Just so you know, I haven't seen a letter like that in a long time. Currently, if I get them in the back of a cocktail napkin, I consider it a success. So the reality is we want to make the barrier for making nominations as low as possible and non-existent if we possibly can. So when I meet with every group later today and over the course of the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be asking every group, please, please, please send me nominations. Tell me the names of individuals we ought to pursue. The only thing I'm going to ask each person to do, though, is stop when you get to the but. And what I mean by that is someone says, oh, so-and-so would be terrific, but they've always lived in Chicago, they've always lived in Boston, they've always lived in LA, and they would never come here. Or they've always been at this institution. Stop. Stop when you get to that but. Let me earn my living here. Let me go out and recruit them. Now, if they tell me no, nothing lost. But they might say yes. And what we're finding is that individuals are accepting jobs currently in places they hadn't thought of going before for one of several reasons. Part of it is a challenge. I mastered my domain, I need a new challenge, right? Part of it is for family issues, especially elder care. So I would like to take advantage of that, right? So we want to make sure that faculty, staff, anyone within earshot, if they have someone they wish to recommend, nominate, just give me their name and I'll trace them. I have a research team and their job is to identify those individuals, figure out where they are, get me their number so I can make a phone call.
So you need name, title, and email of the individual?
Heck, if I got all that, I'd be thrilled. I'd
That's
pass
great.
out on the ground because usually I'll get literally just a name of somebody, and every once in a while someone will spell it out phonetically for me, and that'll be good.
Right, that's good enough.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
I'll take whatever I could get.
Okay.
Threshold is really low.
Right.
Any other
Madam
questions?
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
So, Alberto, you started your monologue earlier today talking about potentially some difficulties or mixed perception out there on the street regarding our reputation. Could you speak more about that? And I guess, have you kind of surveyed that pulse out there with a number of potential people in the industry who have strong opinions about this perception?
I'll be honest with you, the biggest perception that people have is they just don't know the institution. It's not that they formulated a good opinion or bad opinion, right? They just don't know it. They know it by name, they know the location, but they just don't know much about it, right? They know the size, so they know kind of the really basics, kind of think of it as the headlines in the newspaper, right? They know just that headline and that's it. And so our job then is to fill them in. Now, what I was referring to is that anyone who's going to be serious about this opportunity, one of the first things they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and scan the newspapers, right? Kind of what you would expect them to do. I just don't think it tells the whole story. I just don't think it tells the right story. And so in anticipation of that, I want to inoculate folks. I want to say, hey, read what you got to read, and that's one point. That's one data point. Let me give you a whole bunch of other data points to fully educate you on what it is that this opportunity is all about, right? It can't just be driven by one data point. It has to be driven by the multitude of all the really good things that are taking place. And that's what I was alluding to. I answered your question. I feel like I'm talking to God.
To dovetail off of that question, Orlando, the Orlando Economic Partnership has a campaign, Orlando, you don't know the half of it. And it'll go into its second phase here very shortly. Commissioner Martin was a former chair of the organization, and I think you'll find that useful. I don't care what the reputation is. This is about the future of the university, and it's our job to sell it. It's our job to present the opportunities to these candidates that they really can do something for themselves, for the university, and for the state of Florida. And I think a publication that would be very helpful would be the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the Florida 2030 plan. The Florida Chamber of Commerce has determined where we need to go as a state, And I think the candidates have to be aware of that, and they have to be able to swim in those lanes or avoid those lanes. And that's a 3-year research project that costs $2 million, 3 goals, 39 objectives. So I think that's going to be very important. That's about the future of Florida, and that's what we ought to focus in here on the candidates, about the future.
Madam Chair, it would now be a good time for search committee members to provide additional thoughts, or is there another time with regard to what we would like to see in a candidate? Is there another time scheduled for search committee?
We could do it now.
members?
We also have the different listening sessions, and folks could do that. Either way is good. I'm taking notes, so either way.
If you want, sure.
May I add something,
Sure.
please? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pimentel, for everything that you've shared with us today. I just wanted to highlight something that I feel is very important and very important to several members of our community, and that's the ability for this individual, this leader, the ability to actively promote intentionality, inclusivity, and intersectionality through speech and behavior. Now, what does that mean? What do I mean by that? The ability to bring focused attention to one community or population as needed, while ensuring that space and resources are also distributed equitably, and shared experiences and challenges are addressed collectively. I say this because this week alone, we're celebrating International Education Week, Transgender Awareness Week. The month of November, we have been celebrating Veterans Month. Earlier this month, we celebrated First Generation Education Week, which you mentioned during our last time together. And in September, we celebrated Hispanic Serving Institution Week. The list goes on and on. But a lot of communities, a lot of desire to be seen and heard, and high expectations for this leader to find the harmony within those three, characteristics, right? Those three concepts of intentionality, inclusivity, and intersectionality. I wanted to highlight that. And I appreciate you taking that into consideration as you go off and have these conversations with potential candidates. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I ask a question? Okay. Thank you so much for enlightening us while you were here today. Quick question for you is about the selling portion, which I think is so important, and I'm glad that you mentioned it today. Once we get those 6 to 12 candidates here for interviews, I'm guessing that they're going to get a campus tour of sorts. How do you plan to sell them once we're here and we can show them the university more at heart? In the previous search, the Vice President of Enrollment Services actually gave them a helicopter tour. Not that I'm suggesting that we do that, but I'm just saying, what do we want to do to sell them once we're here, and what have you done in the past?
So part of it is not to wait until we get to that point, right?
Just to be straight.
Helicopter is not necessary, but here's what is. As we think about this particular search, there are 2 items that we need to start giving thought to. The first is, what are those documents that we want to share with candidates? And I'm talking about internal documents that, either planning documents or documents that help explain what the future is, might explain where you've been in the past, right? So there are university-related documents that we need to share with them. The second to the comment you were making earlier is documents about the future of Orlando, future of the university, things that are much more global, that help the candidates start to get the right frame of mind, okay? We need to do that early on, so that way they know that it's, with major universities like this, it's not just about the job of being the president of the university. It's about the university's role in being an economic driver in the region and in the state. And they have to get both, right? And at the same time that they're doing that, they can't forget that they're serving the students, right? Because you could get really caught up in all this other really cool stuff and forget that your job is to serve the students at the end of the day. And so what we want to do then is identify those documents, and it could come from a variety of different sources, that we want the candidates to take a look at. Now, then you use the interview as a test. And the test is this: did you read the documents? Because you could tell the difference between someone who has done their homework and actually invested the time to learn about the institution, about the community, and those who haven't. And if they come before you and they haven't done their homework, then you need not consider them further, right? Because that's telling me they're not taking you seriously enough. Or if they have read it and they haven't made the connection, then you don't want them either, right? Because that means they didn't notice where the impact could possibly be. Now, once we get to that, know that candidates are going to come in quietly, privately, and at that point, we do want to make sure that they meet people, individuals who could help us sell the institution, and take a tour of the campus, meet with students. They're going to want to meet with individuals privately, quietly, before coming for that full blown-out session. It's part of doing their homework, right? It's investing in stuff. Most of them will want to do it incognito. So what many of my candidates have done in the past is come in as a prospective parent. I've had candidates send one of the little postcards or email and say, I'm interested in attending your university. And then they start clocking, how many days does it take before I get anything from the university? When I get that from the university, what does it look like? Did anyone make any outreach? And what they're trying to do is get a sense of what's that customer service look like? What is that? How is the school marketing itself, and how is it doing its outreach? Then they'll come in and they'll take a tour as a parent to see how is the school presenting itself. They'll talk to department heads, they'll talk to deans and say, my son or daughter's thinking about here, what can you tell me about it? And part of what they're checking to see is, what's your self-perception? And how is that coming across? If you think you're great, but you're not exuding that, that's a problem, right? And certainly we've been, committees have been surprised, and not always in a good way, when they report back and say, I came here and I visited your school and let me tell you how they presented the situation. They talked to me about how they have so much deferred maintenance that they don't know what they're going to do. They talked to me about how salaries of faculty are really low and faculty are not real happy. They said, as a potential parent, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear about the potential. I don't want to hear that you're miserable here, right? But they'll come in and they'll do that. So know that part of it is that aspect of it. When you get down to the top three, then you want to spend more time connecting those individuals with individuals outside of the university so they see the full potential of the city and of the state. Does that help? Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I have a general question with, regard with timing. I just want to verify that the search committee will have an opportunity to review marketing materials and advertising outlets, if that's possible. I'd appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, in fact, what I will do is take it one step further. If there are venues that we ought to be sensitive to, and that means anything from academic specific, discipline specific, to listservs, to organizations that cater to particular groups, we want to make sure we hit those. Most of them are inexpensive for us to do. A lot of them are free, and it's silly for us not to engage in those. So if there are any of those that you want to make sure get put on the list, what I will do is I'll develop a list, and then just ask folks, add to the list, right? The only cautionary note I have is that we do need to make sure that cost plays a factor here. So if you ask me, wouldn't it be great if we get the New York Times Sunday edition, full page? I may say, at the price that they're going to charge, probably not a good idea, right? Or the Wall Street Journal or something like that. Every once in a while I get those kind of requests, not practicable. The reality is the vast majority of the requests are easy to satisfy. So yes, we'll share it, and then just feel free to add more venues to the list.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, then thank you, Alberto. You've been thorough in explaining the process to us. I know that you've definitely increased my confidence in the process and how this will go about, and I have high confidence that we will get very good candidates and that we'll all be quite engaged in making sure that's the case. So I want to thank the committee again for your time and your engagement, and please put December 9th on your calendar. Karen, the board office, will be reaching out to you to find a time that works best for all of us. If there are no other comments, then the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
And by the way, I'm going to be in listening sessions all day today. If you want to join me, please feel free to do so. They're open.